Sanchez. I'm going to talking about neuromodulation of urinary tract function. Definition: neuromodulation is understood to be the definitive electrical stimulation of the sacral root S3, which by mechanisms not yet well known restores the excitatory-inhibitory balance of the urination cycle that we find in chronic breathing dysfunction.
Hello everyone, this is Ron from KenHub, and today we're going to be talking about the urinary system. The organs of the urinary system are located in the abdominal cavity, which we see here. Now looking deeper, we see that this system includes the kidneys, like we see here highlighted on this image of the abdomen, the ureters, which leave the kidneys and travel inferiorly within the abdomen, the urinary bladder, which we see in the lower pelvic region, and the urethra, which is located inferior to the bladder, and we can see if we change views to this cross-section of the pelvis, this image right here. These organs work together as a group to filter out excess fluid, the byproducts of metabolism, and other waste materials from your bloodstream, not to mention that they also help store, transport, and excrete urine. Now let's take a closer look at the organs of the urinary system, starting with the kidneys. Before we do that, I'm just going to move here to this image again, where we're going to highlight the kidneys. The kidneys are two bean-shaped organs located in the abdominal cavity. They are located in the retroperitoneum underneath the intraperitoneal organs, which have been removed in this illustration right here. Each kidney is invested in a thin connective tissue capsule known as you would expect, the renal fibrous capsule, which we see here. This protects the kidneys from damage or injury. Also seen from this view, at the superior pole of each kidney is an endocrine gland enclosed in a fibrous capsule and a cushion of perirenal fat called the suprarenal or adrenal gland, which we highlighted here. Now, these glands are not part of the urinary system and function instead as part of the endocrine system. Don't forget that. At the medial border of each kidney is the renal hilum, where the renal arteries, renal veins, and the renal pelvis enter and leave the kidneys. Note that the right kidney sits slightly lower than the left kidney, since it sits posterior inferior to the liver. And by posterior inferior, I mean basically underneath. Now that we looked at the anatomy of the kidneys, let's explore the function. The main function of the kidney is to eliminate excess bodily fluid, salts, and the byproducts of protein metabolism. This results in the production of urine that is transported out of the kidneys through the ureters, which happen to be the next structures that we're going to be talking about, the ureters. The ureters emerge from the kidneys posterior to the renal vessels. They are actually a continuation of the renal pelvis of the kidneys, which we just looked at in the renal hilum image. This video is not over yet. Continue watching now the full video at kenhub.com. We have lots more videos like this one available to our premium members on our
Application in medicine: the location of the sacral foramen and the placement of an electrode in the S3 sacral root is carried out in a very simple way under local anesthesia, verifying its correct placement by the motor and sensory response or with the help of X-rays if necessary. Pros and cons. Pros. Presently, a study takes advantage of genetics to monitor lower urinary tract function that use light-sensitive protein to selectively activate or deactivate a specific cell population. Cons. Pelvic pain, frequency urgency syndrome, fecal incontinence, avoiding difficulty.
Targeting neural communication to restore function. Medtronic sacral neuromodulation for the treatment of overactive bladder, mechanism of action. Overactive bladder, or OAB, is a urologic condition defined by urinary urgency with or without incontinence. urinary frequency, and/or nocturia. OAB affects about 37.4 million adults in the United States. Neural pathways in the brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves together regulate urine storage and elimination through coordination of the bladder, urethra, and pelvic floor muscles. During bladder filling, sensory or afferent signals convey information on bladder fullness, in part via the sacral nerves. The signal travels up the spinal cord to the brain. In response to the full sensation and at a socially appropriate moment, the descending motor or efferent brain pathways, which are under voluntary control, are activated by conscious thought. This causes the urethra and pelvic floor to relax and the bladder detrusor to contract, resulting in voluntary urine release. Dysfunction of the sensory and motor pathways alters the checks and balances that are critical to voluntary bladder control. In OAB patients, brain activity has shown abnormal responses in areas of the brain believed to be important in recognizing urge and frequency, and decreased activity in areas believed to be crucial to voluntary bladder control. Normal bladder functioning can be restored by influencing the sacral nerves, which convey a portion of the signals between the bladder, pelvic floor, and the brain. Medtronic sacral neuromodulation delivers electrical stimulation to a sacral nerve via an implanted neurostimulator. The neurostimulator provides an electrical charge to an area near the sacral nerve, resulting in altered neural activity. This stimulation likely depolarizes the nerve, causing an action potential that propagates impulses along the axon as if the neuron naturally fired an action potential. As a result, it is thought that abnormal sensory input from the bladder is modulated. OAB patients with sacral neuromodulation exhibit patterns of brain activation similar to that of patients with normal function when compared with OAB patients without sacral neuromodulation. These effects are observed in areas of the brain involving sensation, awareness, urge, and timing of urination. This suggests that sacral neuromodulation patients experience normalized sensory signaling to the control centers of the brain, while motor pathways are uninhibited so as not to suppress voluntary voiding. Unlike other therapies that target the bladder, bladder regulation via sacral neuromodulation occurs without physically influencing the bladder or sphincter muscles. Medtronic sacral neuromodulation with the InterStim system is a safe and minimally invasive treatment option for refractory OAB patients that provides continuous control through effective long-term therapy delivery.
Issue of play in Ecuador neurostimulation has had a period of extension in recent years, in such a way that it has gone from being an alternative considered as experimental a short time ago to an alternative that we must offer to patients who suffer from chronic breathing dysfunction. In conclusion, control of the lower urinary tract is complex and poorly understood. Neurostimulation is a complex technique that solves a serious situation in neurogenic patients in addition to urinary incontinence. However, its aggressive maneuvers are currently making its application very restricted. Persistent control of neuronal innervation can be achieved by engineering neurons to express light activable molecules that Eucon activation, regulate neuronal firing, and thus correct overactivate bladder in a rat model.